Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting into a world that never truly disappeared. A world of mist-covered hills, quiet firesides, and voices carried by the wind. Tonight, we're following the full history of the Ancient Celts, from their earliest footsteps across prehistoric Europe, through sacred forests and island shores, all the way to the moment Rome arrived, not with a shout, but with slow, steady steps. This is not a story of loud battles or sudden endings. It's a calm journey through Celtic culture, mythology, island life, and memory. A relaxing history for sleep about how a people can fade from power, yet remain alive in language, music, and imagination. We'll wander through ancient Gaul, Britain, and Ireland, listen to bedtime stories once told beside hearth fires, and feel how time itself slowly changed its rhythm. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now close your eyes, let the world soften, and allow the quiet echo of the ancient Celts to guide you gently into the night. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine yourself standing quietly on a high hill at the edge of ancient Europe. The air is cool and damp, filled with drifting mist that moves slowly across rolling land. There are no cities here, no stone roads, no marble columns, only grass bending under the weight of dew, distant forests breathing softly, and the faint sound of wind moving through tall reeds. This is where our calm history for sleep begins. Long before Rome drew straight lines across maps, long before Greece named the world with reason and geometry, there lived people the classical writers would later call the Celti. To the Greeks and Romans, the ancient Celts seemed to exist at the far edges of the known world, somewhere beyond comfort, beyond order, beyond certainty. Yet in truth, they lived at the center of a quiet, patient civilization shaped by land, seasons, and memory. The origins of the ancient Celts do not arrive with sudden battles or loud declarations. They emerge gently, like dawnlight spreading across fog. Archaeology whispers their earliest traces through what we now call the Hallstatt culture, beginning around the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age in Central Europe. This was not an empire, but a network of communities connected by rivers, salt paths, and trust built slowly over generations. Salt, white and precious, lay at the heart of early Celtic life. Mined from the earth and traded across long distances, it preserved food, strengthened alliances, and quietly linked distant valleys to coastal worlds. Iron followed, harder and darker, drawn from deep within the ground. With it came tools that shaped forests into fields, plows that cut soil more gently, and weapons that existed more as symbols of protection than instruments of conquest. Trade routes stretched like calm veins across Europe, carrying amber, metal, and stories from one village to another. In forest clearings, wooden homes rested close together, built not to impress, but to endure. Smoke rose softly from hearth fires at dusk, blending into the mist rather than breaking it. Life moved slowly here. Mornings began with animals stirring, with hands touching soil, with familiar paths walked again and again. Agriculture was not a struggle against nature, but a conversation with it. Fields were respected, not exhausted. Rivers were thanked, not mastered. Mountains were watched in silence, not climbed for glory. At the heart of Celtic culture lived reverence.
not written law or rigid hierarchy, but a deep awareness that land, water, and sky were alive with presence. Sacred rivers carried memory, forests held voices older than any tribe. Hills were not empty shapes, but places where the veil between worlds felt thin. In this gentle worldview, time itself felt circular, not linear. Seasons returned, ancestors lingered. Life did not rush toward an ending, but flowed quietly onward. This is why the history of the ancient Celts feels different when told softly, slowly, for sleep. Their world was not built for speed or domination. It was shaped by balance, by listening, by patience. Even art, in its earliest form, avoided straight lines and sharp edges. Curves flowed into one another, mirroring rivers, vines, and breath. Nothing stood alone. Everything connected. As night settles over these early Celtic lands, the villages grow quiet. Fires dim. Stars appear above forests untouched by cities. Somewhere, a story is being told without words, carried through ritual, gesture, and shared silence. And from these mist-covered hills, something begins to stir. Not an army, not a kingdom, but an identity. The ancient Celts are waking, not in noise, but in form and feeling. From the fog, from the earth, from memory itself, the first shapes of Celtic art and spirit begin to rise, preparing us to drift gently forward as dawn slowly unfolds into culture.
As the mist slowly lifts from the ancient hills of ancient Europe, the Celtic world does not rush forward. It lingers. It listens. This is not a history driven by dates or borders, but by place. For the ancient Celts, land was never empty space. Every valley held a story. Every river carried a name older than speech. In this gentle history for sleep, we drift deeper into a world where geography became identity, and where memory lived not in books, but in soil, stone, and seasonal rhythm. The early Celtic communities spread quietly across Central and Western Europe, not through conquest, but through familiarity with the land. They followed rivers that curved patiently toward distant seas. They settled near forests that offered shelter, fuel, and silence. These were not accidental choices. The Celts believed certain places were awake. Springs where water emerged from stone were watched with reverence. Hills that caught the first light of dawn were approached carefully, often left untouched. In these spaces, the boundary between the human world and something older felt thin, almost breathable. Daily life unfolded in harmony with these surroundings. Villages were shaped by terrain rather than imposed upon it. Paths curved where animals already walked. Fields followed the gentle logic of slopes and sunlight. Work was steady, repetitive, and deeply familiar. This repetition did not dull life, it soothed it. To plant, to harvest, to prepare for winter, and then to begin again was not seen as limitation, but reassurance. Time itself felt kind. This slow rhythm is why Celtic history, when told calmly, feels like a long exhale. Trade continued to flow, but always quietly. Goods passed hand to hand rather than under banners. Iron tools improved daily life without transforming it into urgency. Jewelry, simple yet intricate, reflected not wealth alone, but belonging. Patterns curved endlessly, looping without beginning or end, reminding the wearer that nothing truly vanished. Even death was not an ending, but a soft turning. Burial sites were placed with intention, aligned with hills, rivers, or the rising sun. The dead were not removed from the living world, but gently woven back into it.
ancestors remained close, not as distant figures of authority, but as quiet presences. Their memory lived in seasonal rituals, in shared meals, in the way stories were told slowly beside firelight. Spoken tradition became the Celtic archive. Knowledge was carried through voice, gesture, and silence. Stories were not rushed. They changed slightly with each telling, adapting like rivers shifting course. This flexibility was not seen as loss, but life. What mattered was not exact repetition, but meaning that endured. In this way, Celtic culture resisted rigidity. There was no single center, no fixed capital, no absolute rule. Authority flowed like water, temporary and responsive. Leadership emerged through wisdom, experience, and trust, rather than permanent power. This made the Celtic world difficult for outsiders to define, and even harder to control. To Greek and Roman observers, this fluidity seemed chaotic. To the Celts themselves, it felt natural. As night settles again over the ancient landscape, we sense something quietly forming beneath the surface. Art begins to deepen. Symbols repeat. Knots tighten and unfold. Spirals echo the movement of seasons and breath. These are not decorations meant to impress an audience. They are meditations made visible. They prepare the mind for continuity, for patience, for rest. And slowly, almost without notice, a shared cultural language begins to emerge across distant communities. The ancient Celts are no longer just people of place, but people of pattern, memory, and quiet connection. From these calm foundations, something more recognizable begins to awaken. Not loudly, not suddenly, but steadily, like embers beneath ash, waiting for the right moment to glow.
The night deepens over the ancient hills, and the Celtic world grows still enough to listen to itself. In this quiet, something subtle begins to change. It does not arrive as a revolution or a declaration. It unfolds gently, like patterns emerging from fog. This is the moment when Celtic art awakens, not as decoration, but as memory made visible. For the ancient Celts, art was never separate from life. It did not hang on walls or stand apart from daily movement. It lived on tools warmed by hands, on vessels that held food and drink, on personal objects carried close to the body. Curving lines began to appear more frequently, not because straight lines were unknown, but because curves felt more honest. Spirals mirrored the turning of seasons, the coiling of smoke, the slow inward pull of thought before sleep. Knots flowed endlessly, without clear beginning or end, offering reassurance that life did not break apart when unseen. In this gentle history for sleep, these forms feel calming because they were meant to be. They were designed not to impress an audience, but to steady the mind. As communities grew more connected through trade and shared ritual, these artistic languages traveled quietly across distances. A curve carved in one valley echoed another shaped far away, not copied exactly, but remembered. This shared visual rhythm helped bind the Celtic world without needing borders or rulers. Identity flowed through recognition rather than control. To wear a patterned brooch or carry a decorated blade was not to declare status, but to signal belonging to a way of seeing the world. Art became a soft conversation between people and place. Even metals seemed to move differently under Celtic hands. Bronze and gold were shaped into forms that suggested motion, as if frozen mid-breath. Nothing felt rigid.
Nothing felt final. The act of crafting itself carried meaning. Time slowed during creation, and in that slowness, attention deepened. This is why so much Celtic art feels meditative even now. It was born from patience. As night rituals unfolded, firelight danced across these forms, making them appear alive. Shadows shifted along curves and spirals, reinforcing the sense that objects held presence beyond their material. This was not superstition in the modern sense, but relationship. The world was experienced as layered, with visible and invisible realms touching gently. Art helped navigate that space. It guided emotion, it soothed fear, it reminded the viewer that chaos could be shaped into flow. As we drift further into this chapter, we begin to sense the quiet confidence forming within Celtic culture. They did not rush to record themselves in stone or text. They trusted continuity over permanence. What mattered would survive through repetition, through shared feeling, through pattern. This trust would later confuse outsiders who sought clear laws and written boundaries. But for the Celts, meaning lived in motion, not fixation. As dawn approaches in our imagination, mist returns to the hills, wrapping villages once more. Yet something has changed. The ancient Celts are no longer only people of land and rhythm. They are becoming people of symbol and story. Their identity is awakening, softly, artistically, ready to travel further than geography ever could. From these calm beginnings, the Celtic world prepares to move outward, carrying its patterns, beliefs, and quiet strength toward encounters that will challenge and reshape it. But for now, we remain here, suspended in this gentle moment where art breathes, memory settles, and history rests just long enough for sleep.
Let the night grow a little darker now, and imagine yourself seated quietly beside a low Celtic fire. The flames move slowly, not wild, not urgent, just steady enough to keep the cold away. In the soft glow, something catches the light, a golden torque resting against a traveler's chest. It curves smoothly around the neck, heavy yet balanced, reflecting firelight in gentle pulses. This is the beginning of the Tène awakening, a calm journey through early Celtic history where art, identity, and memory melt together like metal in flame. Unlike earlier times when survival shaped every object, the Tène world allowed beauty to breathe. Beginning around the 5th century BCE, Celtic culture entered a phase where craftsmanship no longer hid quietly in function. It spoke, softly but clearly. Lines began to flow with confidence. Spirals stretched and returned. Curves replaced edges, not to weaken form, but to remind the eye that strength could move. This was not art separated from life, it was life given rhythm. Jewelry shimmered not as display, but as story. Each torque, brooch, or arm ring carried echoes of ancestry, geography, and belief. Gold was shaped to suggest motion, as if the wearer carried sunlight even at night. Bronze and iron followed the same philosophy. Weapons, often misunderstood by outsiders as signs of constant war, were crafted with care that suggested restraint rather than violence. A sword's hilt curved comfortably into the hand. A shield's round shape reflected not only blows, but the world around it: fire, sky, faces. These objects were practical, yes, but they were also meditations.
They reminded Celtic warriors that strength carried responsibility and that every action stood within a longer story. To walk into the world wearing Tène art was to carry one's people visibly and quietly. Even everyday items followed this language. Belts, scabbards, drinking vessels, and horse gear were shaped with the same flowing attention. Nothing existed alone. Patterns moved across surfaces as if alive, connecting object to object, person to place. This consistency created a shared visual heartbeat across vast regions of Europe. A Celt traveling far from home could recognize familiarity not by accent or flag, but by curve and rhythm. In this way, Tène culture unified without force. It whispered identity instead of shouting it. The firelight flickering across these forms did more than illuminate them, it animated them. As shadows shifted, spirals appeared to turn, lines seemed to breathe. This effect was not accidental. Celtic artists understood movement, light, and human perception intuitively. Their art was meant to be experienced slowly, in half-light, in quiet moments. This is why it feels so natural within a relaxing story about ancient Celtic art. It was designed for contemplation, not spectacle. As we drift deeper into this calm journey through early Celtic history, we begin to understand that the Celts did not separate warrior from artist or tool from meaning. A Celtic warrior did not simply carry weapons, he carried lineage, he carried memory shaped in metal. Every mark reminded him of who stood behind him and who would come after. In this world, beauty was not softness, it was continuity, and continuity was strength. As the fire settles lower, embers glowing softly, we sense that this artistic awakening is not the surface of Celtic culture, but a doorway. Behind these curves and polished forms lies a deeper layer, one that does not shine with gold, but with understanding. A sacred world where knowledge is spoken softly, remembered carefully, and guarded not by walls, but by wisdom. The flames dim, the torque cools against the skin, and somewhere beyond the edge of the firelight, another presence waits, patient, observant, unseen.
The fire beside us has settled into a quieter rhythm now, its light softer, more thoughtful. In this calm glow, figures begin to emerge, not marching, not shouting, but standing with still confidence. These are the Celtic warriors of the Tène world, often misunderstood, often simplified, yet far more complex than the image history usually leaves behind. In this relaxing story about ancient Celtic art and identity, the warrior is not defined by battle alone, but by what he carries, remembers, and protects. A Celtic warrior did not wake each day expecting war. Most days were shaped by land, kinship, and routine. Yet when he stepped beyond his village, he did so wearing history. His torque rested against his throat like a quiet oath. His shield bore curves that echoed generations before him. His weapon, carefully maintained, was less an instrument of aggression and more a symbol of readiness and responsibility. To outsiders, especially Roman observers centuries later, these warriors seemed fierce, even chaotic. But this perception came from misunderstanding movement as disorder. Celtic warfare, when it occurred, was personal, ritualized, and deeply tied to identity. The body itself became a canvas. Hair was worn deliberately. Clothing carried color and meaning. Metal touched skin not to weigh it down, but to remind the wearer of lineage. Every element told a story. Even silence mattered. A warrior's presence spoke before he ever raised a weapon. Tène craftsmanship reinforced this mindset. Shields were round not only for practical deflection, but for symbolic wholeness.
They reflected the world back at the bearer, reminding him that he stood within it, not above it. Sword scabbards curved gently, their designs flowing like water rather than cutting sharply through space. This was not weakness, it was control. To move with restraint, to strike only when necessary, was seen as strength shaped by wisdom. In this calm journey through early Celtic history, we begin to understand that the warrior class was not separate from the community. They were not professional soldiers removed from daily life. They farmed, crafted, celebrated, and mourned alongside everyone else. When conflict came, it was temporary. What remained was belonging. This integration kept violence from becoming identity. The warrior returned to the rhythm of seasons as easily as he stepped away from it. Stories of ancestors were never far. They lived in song, in gesture, in the weight of familiar objects passed down over time. A blade might carry notches that marked events rather than victories. A shield might hold repairs layered like memory itself. These items aged with their owners, absorbing life rather than replacing it. This is why Celtic warriors were seen as living stories. They did not just remember the past, they embodied it. Firelight again plays across metal surfaces, making curves shimmer and shadows breathe. In these moments, the warrior does not appear threatening. He appears grounded, calm, rooted. The beauty of Tène art softened the edges of conflict, reminding those who carried it that they were part of something longer and deeper than any single moment of violence. As night deepens further, a subtle shift begins to take place. We sense that even the warrior listens to voices beyond his own experience. There are guides in this world, not marked by armor or weapons, but knowledge carried differently. The fire crackles once more, quieter now, and the stories begin to drift away from metal and movement towards something unseen. Beyond the warriors and their crafted symbols lies a sacred layer of Celtic life, where wisdom is remembered without writing, and where the land itself speaks through chosen listeners. As the fire finally settles into glowing embers, the world of metal and movement grows quiet. In this softened darkness, another presence becomes clear. It does not shine, it does not clash, it listens. Beyond the beauty of Tène art and the calm strength of Celtic warriors lies the sacred layer of Celtic life, guarded not by walls or weapons, but by memory and wisdom. This is where the Druids dwell, not as rulers, but as keepers. In this calm journey through early Celtic history, the Druids do not step forward dramatically. They are already there, standing slightly apart, observing the rhythms others move within. To imagine a Druid is not to picture a single figure, but a role that shifts with time and place. They were judges, healers, astronomers, poets, and teachers, woven into the fabric of community life. Their power came not from command, but from understanding. Knowledge among the Celts was not written down lightly. Words were living things, meant to be carried in breath and memory rather than fixed on stone. Druids trained for years, sometimes decades, memorizing law, genealogy, cosmology, and ritual. This oral tradition was not a limitation, but a safeguard. What lived in memory could adapt, breathe, and remain sacred. In a world shaped by Tène kerms and flowing forms, rigidity had no place. Wisdom moved like water, responsive to the moment. The Druids understood the land as a text constantly being rewritten by seasons and stars. Forests were classrooms, rivers were teachers. The turning of the moon marked time more reliably than any carved calendar. Sacred groves became places of gathering, not because they were owned, but because they were respected. In these spaces, the boundary between the human and the unseen felt close, but never forced. Ritual was not spectacle, it was alignment. To participate was to slow down, to listen, to place oneself correctly within the larger pattern. Even art took on deeper meaning here. The spirals and knots of Tène design were not merely beautiful, they mirrored the Druids' understanding of reality as layered and continuous. Life folded into death. The visible world touched the invisible. Nothing truly ended. This worldview shaped how the Celts approached fear, loss, and uncertainty. Death was not final separation, but a movement into another state of being. Ancestors were not distant, they were present, attentive, part of the ongoing conversation between generations. This belief softened the edge of conflict and gave weight to restraint. A warrior guided by Druidic teaching knew that action echoed beyond a single lifetime. The Druids also served as bridges between tribes. Where political unity was fluid, spiritual language created continuity. Shared rituals, shared stories, and shared understanding of the cosmos allowed distant communities to recognize one another as part of the same living world. This quiet cohesion confused later Roman observers who sought fixed hierarchies and written law. To them, the Druids seemed elusive, even threatening, precisely because they could not be easily controlled. Yet within Celtic society, the Druids preserved balance. They reminded people when to act and when to wait. They interpreted signs not to predict conquest, but to maintain harmony. As the night deepens further in our imagination, we feel the calm presence of this sacred layer settling over the Tène world. The fire has burned down, metal rests, weapons sleep. In the silence between breaths, the Druids' teachings linger, shaping thought rather than commanding behavior. This is why Celtic culture endured across vast distances and generations without central authority. It trusted memory, it trusted listening, it trusted that meaning would survive if carried gently. And now, as this chapter draws to a close, we sense the turning of the story. The Celtic world, rich in art, grounded in ritual, and guided by unseen wisdom, is about to encounter forces that move differently. The outside world approaches with straight lines, written law, and marching order. But for this moment, before that contact arrives, we remain here, in the quiet grove, beneath ancient trees, where knowledge breathes softly, history slows, and sleep comes easily.
Let the world slow even further now. Imagine the sound of wind moving gently through a dense, ancient forest. Leaves whisper softly above you. The ground beneath your feet is covered in moss and fallen branches, absorbing every step. Somewhere deeper among the trees, you sense movement. Not hurried, not loud. A druid walks calmly across the forest floor, robes brushing against bark and fern, footsteps blending into the rhythm of the land itself. This is the spiritual heart of the Celtic world, a place where history for sleep becomes almost indistinguishable from breath and shadow. To understand the ancient Celts, one must step away from villages and weapons and enter these sacred groves. Here, the Druids were not distant mystics or solitary priests. They were woven into everyday life, serving as spiritual guides, judges, healers, astronomers, and living archives of tradition. In a culture without written scripture, memory itself became sacred, and the Druids were its careful keepers. They did not rush knowledge. They carried it slowly, allowing meaning to mature across years of listening and observation. The forest was their library. The rustle of leaves taught patience. The growth rings of trees marked time more truthfully than calendars. Among all trees, the oak stood apart, strong, long-living, deeply rooted. It embodied endurance and balance. Beneath oak canopies, teachings were shared quietly, disputes were settled, and rituals aligned the community with the unseen rhythms of the world. Stone circles and standing stones nearby added another layer of presence. They were not monuments of dominance, but markers of attention, points where the human world paused to acknowledge something older. In this gentle telling of Celtic mythology for sleep, these spaces feel calm rather than dramatic, because they were never meant to impress, they were meant to ground. The Druids understood that the divine was not distant or elevated, but embedded in the land itself. Rivers carried memory, hills held silence, stones remembered touch. To walk through a sacred grove was not to enter a temple, but to enter relationship. Ritual followed natural cycles rather than imposed schedules. The turning of seasons guided ceremony. Solstices and equinoxes arrived not as events to celebrate loudly, but as moments to notice. At the longest night, people gathered to remember that light always returns. At the longest day, they acknowledged abundance without clinging to it. These observances unfolded slowly, like a relaxing history before sleep, reminding the community that time moved in circles, not lines. Life did not race forward, it returned. The Druids' role within this cycle was not to command belief, but to maintain balance. They interpreted signs gently, never forcing meaning. A shift in wind, an unusual bird call, the timing of a bloom, these were read as conversations, not predictions. This approach fostered humility. Humans were participants, not masters. In this world, the mysterious Celtic Druids were not figures of fear, but of reassurance. They helped people feel oriented within a living landscape. Knowledge was shared through story and song, shaped to be remembered rather than recorded. Myths were not distant tales of gods removed from daily life. They explained relationships between people and place, between action and consequence. Celtic mythology, when told gently as boring history for sleep, reveals itself not as fantasy, but as a framework for living attentively. Even now, as we imagine standing quietly in this grove, the forest seems to breathe around us. Nothing demands attention, nothing rushes. The Druid pauses, listening, hand resting lightly against the bark of an oak. In this stillness, we sense that the spiritual world of the Celts was never separate from the ordinary. It was simply the ordinary fully noticed. And as the wind softens and the leaves settle, we begin to feel the gentle pull back toward human life, toward villages and fires and shared meals. The sacred does not disappear, it follows quietly, preparing to rejoin the rhythm of tribal existence. Stay within the forest a little longer. The wind softens and the sacred grove grows quieter, as if preparing to mark the passing of time itself. For the ancient Celts, time was not something to measure or control, it was something to feel. In this gentle history for sleep, time moves not forward but around, guided by light, shadow, and the slow breath of the land. The Druids were the listeners of this rhythm. They watched the sky not to predict conquest or fortune, but to understand balance. The sun's path across the year shaped every aspect of Celtic life, from planting to gathering, from ritual to rest. When the winter solstice arrived, the longest night of the year, it was not feared, it was honored. Fires were kept low and steady, not celebratory, but reassuring.
People gathered close, knowing that even in deep darkness, the sun would return. This knowledge did not come from books, it came from observation, passed gently from one generation to the next. At the summer solstice, when daylight stretched longest, there was gratitude without excess. Abundance was acknowledged, but never assumed permanent. The Druids reminded the people that light, like life, was generous but temporary. Between these two anchors lay the equinoxes, moments of balance where day and night met as equals. These were not dramatic turning points, but quiet acknowledgments, a pause, a breath. In this calm journey through Celtic mythology told as boring history for sleep, the calendar itself becomes a story of patience. Each season had a role. Spring was not rushed, seeds rested before rising. Summer was not exploited, fields were cared for, not drained. Autumn was a time of preparation rather than fear. Winter was not empty, but inward. Rituals followed this same tone. There were no grand temples demanding attention. Ceremony happened under open sky, beside water, among trees. The Druids guided these moments with restraint. Their voices were low, their gestures simple. Meaning came from repetition, not spectacle. Over time, these cycles shaped the Celtic sense of self. Identity was not fixed at birth, but renewed through participation in seasonal rhythm. A child learned when to speak and when to listen by watching the land. Elders were valued not for authority alone, but for memory. They remembered winters that lasted longer, summers that failed, and how balance was restored. This collective memory reduced panic. It taught resilience without aggression. Even Celtic mythology reflected this circular understanding. Stories of gods and spirits rarely ended conclusively. They transformed. A figure might disappear into mist, become a river, or return in another form. These tales were not meant to escape reality, but to explain continuity. Loss was never absolute. Change was expected. The Druids held these stories carefully, shaping them to fit the moment, reminding listeners that uncertainty was part of the pattern, not a mistake. As night deepens once more, we feel the grove settling into stillness. The stars above mark time without counting it. The earth beneath holds warmth from past suns. In this quiet alignment, the sacred world of the Celts does not feel distant or mysterious. It feels familiar, almost comforting. And slowly the attention of the story begins to shift. The forest does not release us abruptly, it simply opens a path. Beyond the trees, faint firelight suggests human presence again. Villages, families, daily life shaped quietly by the rhythms learned here. The Druids remain behind, listening as the people carry what they have learned back into the world.
Slowly now, the forest releases us. Not suddenly, not completely, but with quiet permission. The sacred grove remains behind, still breathing, still listening, as the path opens back toward human life. In this final movement of our gentle history for sleep, the spiritual world of the Celts does not vanish when we leave the trees. It follows, softly woven into everyday existence. The ancient Celts never separated the sacred from the ordinary. What was learned beneath oak and stone traveled back into villages, hearths, and shared labor. Druids did not live apart from society. They walked among families, sat beside fires, and watched children grow. Their teachings were not sermons, but reminders embedded in daily rhythm. When disputes arose within the tribe, they were settled not by force, but by memory. A Druid recalled precedent, lineage, and balance, guiding resolution rather than imposing judgment. In this way, law remained human, flexible, and compassionate. The authority of the Druids rested in trust, not fear. Tribal life unfolded in close relationship with the land. Homes clustered where soil was generous and water nearby. Work was shared, not divided sharply by rank. Farming, herding, crafting, and storytelling blended into one continuous flow. Children learned by observing, elders taught by remembering aloud. Evenings were shaped by firelight and voices rather than schedules. In these moments, Celtic mythology slipped naturally into conversation. Stories of gods, spirits, and ancestors were not distant legends, but familiar companions that explained why things were the way they were. A storm was not random. A poor harvest was not meaningless. Each event fit within a larger pattern, understood collectively. This gentle framing reduced fear. Life felt uncertain, but not hostile. Ritual remained present, but subtle. A simple gesture before planting, a quiet offering at a stream, a pause before travel. These actions required no audience. They reaffirmed connection. The cycle of seasons continued to guide behavior without urgency. People prepared, adapted, and waited. Patience was not taught explicitly, it was lived. In this calm journey through early Celtic history, we begin to see how spiritual belief shaped resilience. Because time was circular, failure was temporary. Because ancestors remained present, loss did not erase belonging. Because the land was alive, care replaced control. This worldview allowed communities to endure change without losing themselves. As the night deepens again in our imagination, village sounds soften, tools rest, animals settle. Smoke rises slowly into the dark. Somewhere nearby, a druid listens, not speaking, simply present. The sacred and the social overlap seamlessly. There is no boundary to cross. This is why later outside powers struggled to understand the Celts. Their strength was not centralized. Their beliefs were not confined. Everything was shared, carried, and remembered together. And now, as this chapter gently closes, we sense the story preparing to move again. Beyond the quiet stability of tribal life, new pressures will soon appear. Trade routes will expand, encounters with unfamiliar cultures will increase, and eventually, powerful empires will begin to notice these lands shaped by forest wisdom and circular time. But for now, we rest here, in the village, near the fire, with stories low and slow. The gods have not been left behind. They sit quietly within daily life, waiting as the next chapter approaches. The forest fades gently behind us, and evening settles over a Celtic village. Firelight flickers low and warm, not bright enough to dominate the night, just enough to gather people together. Soft laughter drifts through the air. Wooden cups touch lightly, not in celebration of excess, but in quiet companionship. This is where tribal life truly reveals itself, not through battle or conquest, but through closeness, routine, and shared presence. In this peaceful look at ancient Celtic warriors and families, the tribe is not an abstract structure, it is a living circle, defined by relationships rather than rigid rank. At its center stands the chieftain, not as an untouchable ruler, but as a visible point of responsibility. Leadership among the Celtic tribes was earned through generosity, memory, and the ability to keep balance. A chieftain listened as much as he spoke.
His authority rested on trust built slowly, reinforced through fairness in dispute and courage shown only when needed. Around him gathered the warrior nobility, men and women whose role was protection rather than dominance. They were respected not for violence, but for readiness. Their presence reassured the tribe that danger, if it came, would be met calmly. Beyond them lived farmers, herders, and craftspeople, forming the quiet backbone of daily life. Their work fed the tribe, clothed it, and shaped its tools. No role existed alone. Each depended on the others, creating a social structure that felt organic rather than imposed. Evenings like this one reflected that balance. Meals were shared, not consumed quickly. Stories flowed between generations, blending memory with gentle humor. Children listened from the edges, absorbing lessons without instruction. Elders spoke slowly, choosing words that carried weight rather than volume. Honor within Celtic tribes did not come from accumulation, but from exchange. Gifts moved between families and allies, strengthening bonds rather than displaying wealth. A finely crafted object was valued not only for its beauty, but for the story of its making and giving. Oaths were spoken softly, often beside fire or water, witnessed by community rather than enforced by threat. A promise carried meaning because it was remembered. This social fabric shaped how Celtic warriors understood themselves. They did not stand apart from family life. They were sons, daughters, parents, neighbors. Their hair might be braided with care, their round shields resting nearby, but these symbols did not define their entire identity. In this peaceful journey through early Celtic history, the warrior is present but not central. Strength exists, but it does not overwhelm gentleness. Training happened quietly, often through imitation rather than instruction. A young person learned how to stand, how to move, how to hold a shield simply by watching those around them. There was no urgency. Readiness was a state of being, not a constant action. This peaceful rhythm kept violence from becoming spectacle. The tribe valued continuity more than conquest. Nights like this reinforced belonging. As the fire crackles softly, faces glow in amber light. Someone pours another drink. Someone else begins a low story, not of battle, but of ancestry and place. These moments mattered more than any display of force. They reminded the tribe who they were and why they endured. As the night deepens, the fire draws people closer, tightening the circle. Within it, the Celtic world feels complete. Yet beyond the warmth, stories wait to be told. Stories of individuals whose deeds would later grow into legend. The transition begins quietly, from shared life toward remembered heroism, as the embers glow and voices lower, preparing the way for tales that will travel beyond the tribe.
The fire at the center of the village burns a little steadier now, no longer just a source of warmth, but a gentle anchor around which the tribe gathers. This is the hour of feasting, not loud or hurried, but unforced and familiar. Food is brought forward slowly, shared without ceremony, yet with deep meaning. In this peaceful look at ancient Celtic warriors and families, the feast is not excess, it is connection. People sit close, not divided by rank, but arranged by relationship. The chieftain does not sit apart. He listens, nods, remembers names. The warrior nobility relaxes, shields resting against walls, hair unbound, voices softened. Farmers and craftspeople speak freely, knowing their place is not lesser, but essential. Feasting within Celtic tribes was a social language. Who offered food first, who received a gift, who spoke last. These details mattered, not as rules, but as signals of respect. A finely made cup passed from hand to hand carried more than drink, it carried trust. A piece of meat offered across the fire acknowledged shared labor and shared fate. These gestures reinforced unity without needing explanation. In this calm journey through early Celtic history, honor is not dramatic, it is practical. Gifts move quietly through the circle. A decorated brooch changes owners. A blade crafted by a local smith is offered to mark alliance. These objects are not payment, they are memory. To give is to bind oneself. To receive is to accept responsibility. Among the Celtic tribes, generosity established reputation more securely than force ever could. This is why promises mattered. An oath spoken near fire or water did not require written record. It required witnesses who would remember. Honor lived in community awareness. Breaking a vow did not bring punishment alone, it brought loss of standing, something far more difficult to repair. This social structure shaped the warrior's role even further. A Celtic warrior fought not for abstraction, but for people whose faces he saw every night. His courage was measured not by aggression, but by restraint. To protect the feast, the children sleeping nearby, the elders whose stories anchored identity, this was the purpose of readiness. In this gentle telling, we avoid blood and spectacle, because Celtic warfare, though real, was not the center of existence. Peaceful continuity was. Training took place quietly. Games tested strength without cruelty. Young warriors learned patience by waiting, control by holding back. The tribe did not glorify chaos, it valued stability. As the feast draws on, stories begin to surface. Not yet heroic legends, but shared recollections. Someone recalls a journey taken years ago, another speaks of a hard winter survived. Laughter rises briefly, then fades into contentment. These stories reinforce belonging. They remind everyone present that they are part of a longer narrative that began before them and will continue after them. This is how identity survived without writing. Memory was communal. Repetition kept it alive. The firelight softens faces, blurring age and distinction. In this moment, warrior, farmer, and leader feel equally human. This equality does not erase roles, but harmonizes them. Everyone knows what is expected, not because it is enforced, but because it has always been done this way. As the night deepens, the feast slows. Cups empty, voices lower. Some lean back, listening rather than speaking. Children drift closer to parents. The fire becomes quieter, drawing attention inward. And now, almost without intention, the tone begins to shift. From shared life, the mind drifts toward individuals. From community memory, attention turns to exceptional moments. The tribe does not seek heroes, but stories of courage naturally begin to stand out. Not shouted, not celebrated loudly, but noticed. The transition has begun, gently, from the warmth of the circle toward the tales that will one day travel beyond it. The fire has burned lower now, its warmth steady and familiar, and the village rests in a soft half-silence. This is the moment when stories change shape, not because someone decides to perform, but because memory naturally begins to focus. Within the shared life of the tribe, certain moments stand out, not louder than others, but clearer. This is how Celtic hero stories were born, not from spectacle, but from attention. In this peaceful look at ancient Celtic warriors and families, heroism does not arrive with thunder. It arrives with recognition. Someone remembers a time when calm held during fear. Someone recalls a journey taken when others turned back. These stories are spoken gently, often indirectly, woven into conversation rather than announced. A name is mentioned. A pause follows. The fire crackles softly, as if listening. In Celtic society, heroism was never separated from community. A hero did not rise above the tribe, he emerged from it. His actions mattered because they protected continuity of family, of land, of shared rhythm. A warrior who stood firm so others could sleep peacefully was remembered. A leader who chose restraint over glory was recalled with respect. These memories did not demand admiration. They invited understanding. Over time, repetition shaped these moments into stories that could be carried. Not fixed narratives, but living ones, adapting with each telling. Children heard them first not as lessons, but as background, absorbing values without instruction. Courage sounded like steadiness. Honor felt like reliability. Strength appeared as the ability to remain present. In this peaceful journey through early Celtic history, hero tales remain grounded. They are anchored in place. This hill, that river crossing, the winter when stores ran low. Geography mattered because it held experience. To remember a hero was to remember where it happened and why it mattered. Weapons appear in these stories, but never as the center. A shield is remembered for the moment it held, not the blow it took. A blade is recalled for the choice not to use it. This gentle framing keeps violence from becoming fascination. The tribe valued survival without erosion of self. As night deepens further, listeners relax into the rhythm of familiar voices. Stories drift toward sleep, losing sharp edges, gaining warmth. In these retellings, the line between warrior and storyteller blurs. Everyone present carries part of the memory. This shared ownership prevents myth from becoming domination. No single voice controls the past. It belongs to the circle. This is why Celtic heroic tradition remained fluid. It could grow, soften, or fade depending on need. It was not preserved for power, but for guidance. As the fire finally settles into glowing embers, the stories slow. Words thin out. Silence becomes comfortable. The tribe does not need conclusion. The memory has already been placed where it belongs, within the rhythm of life. And in this quiet, the path ahead becomes visible. Beyond the village, beyond the hills, the world is changing. New encounters will test these values. New forces will challenge this balance. But for now, we remain here, at the threshold between shared life and remembered courage. The heroes do not step away from the fire. They sit beside it, indistinguishable from everyone else, waiting to be recalled only when needed.
Imagine, for a moment, that you are a Celtic child. Night has settled gently outside the wooden walls of your family home. The fire has burned down to a soft glow, and the voices of the village have faded into a quiet murmur. You lie wrapped in wool, listening as an elder begins to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the story to reach you before sleep. This is how Celtic mythology lived, not carved into stone, but whispered into rest. In this soft retelling of Celtic mythology, heroes are not distant figures of perfection. They are familiar names, spoken the way one might speak of relatives long gone. One such name drifts through the room, Cuchulainn, not as the fierce figure later poets would sharpen into legend, but as a young boy first, small and determined, standing at the edge of his homeland. The story is told gently. He is remembered not for violence, but for loyalty. He guards a boundary
not because he seeks glory, but because he promised to do so. His strength in this bedtime telling comes from keeping his word even when it is difficult. The elder pauses often, letting the fire crackle fill the space between sentences, allowing the child listening to drift without fear. Another story follows, quieter still, of a warrior woman whose name changes slightly depending on who tells it. She is not defined by battle, but by courage shaped through choice. She protects her people by standing when others hesitate. She loves her land deeply, not as territory, but as home. In this ancient bedtime story from the ancient Celts, her power is balance. She knows when to fight, but more importantly, when to stop. Her story is offered not to inspire conflict, but to teach restraint and responsibility. The night grows deeper, and the elder's voice lowers. A king appears now, not crowned in gold, but marked by fairness. He is remembered because he listened, because he shared food in times of scarcity, because he placed the well-being of the tribe above his own comfort. His legend does not end in triumph or tragedy, but in continuity. After his passing, the land remains fertile. The people remain united. This is how Celtic heroes endure, not through conquest, but through the stability they leave behind. As these stories unfold, patterns begin to repeat. Loyalty returns again and again. Oaths spoken beside rivers carry weight across generations. Love for homeland appears as quiet devotion rather than loud defense. These symbols matter more than any specific event. They are the true inheritance of Celtic mythology. In this gentle history for sleep, myths are not escapes from reality. They are frameworks for living within it. The child listening does not feel excitement rising. They feel comfort. The stories do not rush toward endings. They circle back, softening, fading, allowing sleep to arrive naturally. This is why ancient Celtic bedtime stories lasted so long. They were designed to calm, not to impress. As the elder's voice finally slows, the names of heroes blend with the sounds of the night. Wind outside, fire settling, breath deepening. The myths do not demand to be remembered precisely. They ask only to be carried. And somewhere between waking and sleep, the child absorbs something lasting. The sense that courage can be gentle, that loyalty can be quiet, and that belonging does not require noise.
The child listening by the fire has not moved. Breath has slowed. Eyes are heavy. Yet the voice continues, softer now, careful not to wake excitement, only understanding. This is how ancient bedtime stories from the ancient Celts were shaped, never to shock, always to settle. Another hero's name drifts into the night, spoken without emphasis, as if it has always belonged here. The story does not begin with a battle, but with a choice. A young leader stands at a crossing of paths, asked to protect his people not by force, but by patience. He waits when others rush. He listens when others shout. In this soft retelling of Celtic mythology, heroism often looks like delay.
The elder explains that this hero became known not because he defeated many, but because he broke no oath. His word was stronger than his spear. When tempted by pride, he turned back. When offered easy gain, he refused. The story lingers on these moments, not because they are dramatic, but because they are rare. The fire crackles gently, filling the pauses with warmth. Then comes a tale of love, not the kind that burns hot and fast, but the kind that binds quietly. A hero leaves home to fulfill a promise, knowing it may cost him years. He carries with him a small token, a ring, a cloak, a memory. Nothing magical, just enough to remind him where he belongs. In this ancient bedtime story from the ancient Celts, love is not possession, it is loyalty carried across distance. The elder's voice softens further as the story unfolds, ensuring no sharp edges remain. Even when loss appears, it is framed gently as transformation rather than ending. Another figure enters the night, a woman remembered for wisdom rather than strength. She sees beyond the present moment, beyond anger, beyond fear. When conflict threatens her people, she speaks calmly, reminding them of winters survived and children yet to be born. Her legend teaches that foresight is a form of courage. In this gentle history for sleep, the listener learns that bravery can be quiet and effective. The elder never raises their voice. Names are offered like gifts, not lessons. Over time, the child begins to recognize patterns. Heroes return, but not in the same form. They appear as guardians, mediators, keepers of balance. The stories avoid details that linger too sharply. Instead, they focus on symbols that can be carried into sleep. Rivers represent promises. Forests stand for patience. The hearth means home. This is the heart of Celtic mythology told softly. It was never meant to be consumed all at once, but absorbed slowly over many nights. Each telling leaves something behind, a feeling rather than a fact. In this way, mythology becomes comfort. The elder pauses again, allowing silence to do its work. The child is no longer following every word. That is the intention. These stories do not demand attention. They offer presence. Even heroes fade gently at the end of each tale, stepping back into the shared world rather than standing apart. This prevents myth from becoming unreachable. It remains close, human, usable. As the night deepens, the elder begins to draw the stories together without concluding them. Heroes travel. They return. Sometimes they do not. But the land remains. The people remain. The patterns endure. This prepares the listener for what comes next, not in the story, but in history. These heroes will not stay still. Their stories will move, carried by people who travel beyond familiar valleys. And as sleep finally arrives, the child drifts with the sense that the world is wide, but connected, filled with stories that move gently, just like the people who carry them.
The song beside the fire grows quieter still, not because the story is ending, but because it is changing shape. The child listening no longer separates hero from world, myth from life. In this soft retelling of Celtic mythology, bedtime stories do not conclude with final lines. They drift outward, like embers carried by a gentle night breeze. The heroes spoken of tonight do not remain inside the house. They step beyond it, carried in memory, carried in names, carried in patterns of behavior that will travel farther than anyone in the room expects. This is how ancient bedtime stories from the ancient Celts quietly prepared people for movement. The elder begins to speak of journeys, not as adventures, but as continuations. A hero leaves not because he is restless, but because the land has taught him to follow cycles. When fields grow crowded, when families expand, when paths feel ready, movement becomes natural. The story frames departure as care rather than loss. Home is not abandoned, it is remembered. The child listening senses that travel does not break belonging, it stretches it. In these gentle myths, heroes carry their values rather than their victories. Loyalty becomes portable. Oaths spoken beside one river still hold meaning beside another. Love for homeland does not prevent adaptation, it guides it. The elder never describes maps or borders. Instead, landscapes appear as feelings, rolling hills that feel familiar even when unnamed, rivers that echo promises made long ago, forests that offer the same quiet welcome wherever they stand. In this calm journey through Celtic mythology told as bedtime history, the world feels connected by repetition rather than distance. Stories hint at gatherings far away, where people who have never met share similar customs, similar symbols, similar ways of honoring the land. The child does not hear this as expansion or conquest. It is described as recognition, as if the same story has been whispered in different places. The heroes become bridges. Their names change slightly. Their details soften or shift, but their essence remains. This is how myth adapts without breaking. As the fire settles into deep red embers, the elder speaks of time passing gently. Generations grow, stories travel with them, told again in new homes, to new children, beside new fires. In each telling, sharp edges are smoothed. What remains is what matters. Courage without cruelty, strength without noise, belonging without possession. These bedtime stories do not glorify dominance, they teach continuity. The child's breathing deepens. The stories no longer need words. Images remain instead. Paths winding through valleys, families resting together at dusk, voices rising and fading in different lands, all carrying the same calm tone. In this moment, myth becomes preparation for history. Without announcing it, the stories have explained how a people could spread across wide spaces while remaining themselves. The elder's voice slows further, guiding the listener gently toward rest. The heroes are no longer figures to watch. They are companions walking quietly beside those who move.
And as sleep finally arrives, the transition is complete. The bedtime stories have done their work. They have softened the idea of change. They have made movement feel safe. Beyond the walls of this house, beyond this village, the ancient Celts will begin to travel more widely, carrying with them not armies, but customs, symbols, and stories shaped like these. The night holds this knowledge without urgency. Tomorrow, history will begin to unfold. But for now, the child sleeps, wrapped in myth, ready for the world that waits beyond the firelight.
Listen closely now, as the sound of distant waves replaces the crackle of the hearth. The land beneath the story has changed. The ground feels damp with salt air, and mist drifts slowly along high cliffs, softening their edges. This is the island world of the ancient Celts, a quiet journey through ancient Britain and Ireland before Rome ever appeared on the horizon. Villages cling gently to the coastline and nestle inland among rolling hills. Life here moves at a different pace, guided by tide and weather rather than road and decree. In this relaxing ancient Celts island life, the sea is not a boundary, it is a presence. Fishermen rise before dawn, not rushed, but attentive, reading the water the way their ancestors did. Nets are repaired with care. Boats are small, built for familiarity rather than conquest. Each launch into the water feels like a conversation with something older and patient. Inland, the rhythm continues just as softly. Fields are worked slowly, shaped by hand and memory. Cattle graze on open land, watched rather than driven. Sheep move in loose clusters, their bells marking time more gently than any clock. Families work together, not because it is demanded, but because it has always been done this way. Children learn seasons before they learn numbers. They know when the light lingers and when it retreats, when the ground is ready and when it must rest. In this quiet journey through ancient Britain and Ireland, culture survives not through monument, but through habit. Music drifts through villages in the evenings, simple instruments carrying familiar tones. A small harp, a wooden flute. Rhythms repeat not to impress, but to comfort. Songs tell of places rather than events, of rivers crossed many times, of hills that always appear in the same place at sunset. These sounds do not demand attention, they accompany life. Rituals remain close to home, a small offering near a stream, a moment of silence before harvest, a shared meal that begins and ends without ceremony. Spiritual life here is intimate. The sacred is woven into daily actions rather than lifted above them. Elders remember stories tied to stones and groves, but they tell them sparingly, allowing meaning to settle naturally. In these island communities, identity feels rooted yet flexible. People belong not to a single ruler or city, but to land, kin, and memory. The sea brings news slowly. Traders arrive occasionally carrying unfamiliar objects and distant words, but nothing arrives all at once. Change comes gently, leaving time to adjust. This softness is why so much Celtic culture endures here long after it fades elsewhere. Isolation protects without hardening. Distance allows reflection. As night falls over the islands, fog thickens, and sound travels differently. A voice carries farther, a wave feels closer. Fires glow in scattered homes, each one a small center of warmth against the vast dark. In this calm history for sleep, the island Celts do not feel primitive or incomplete. They feel settled, complete in their slowness. The world beyond the sea exists, but it does not press in, not yet.
And as the listener rests within this quiet landscape, there is no urgency, only continuity. The islands breathe, the people listen. The story pauses, aware that far beyond the mist, something is beginning to move. But for now, the horizon remains soft, and the night holds steady.
The night on the islands deepens, and with it comes a stillness shaped by water and wind. Fires burn low inside round houses, and outside the sea keeps its steady rhythm, never fully silent, never demanding attention. In this quiet journey through ancient Britain and Ireland, island life reveals itself not through moments of change, but through what remains the same. Morning arrives gently. People wake when light allows, not when a signal calls them. Work begins slowly, guided by weather and season. A farmer steps into damp grass, feeling the ground before trusting it. A herder counts animals not by number, but by familiarity. Names matter more than totals. In this relaxing ancient Celtic island life, productivity is measured in continuity rather than speed. Villages are small, often separated by hills or inlets, yet connected by shared understanding. When people gather, it is not for spectacle, it is for maintenance, of tools, of relationships, of memory. Stories are exchanged the way goods are, without ceremony. Someone recalls how a path once flooded and how it was avoided. Another remembers a year when crops failed and what was done differently next time. This is knowledge kept alive through repetition, not record. Music continues to shape the emotional landscape. It appears unexpectedly, woven into work rather than reserved for performance. A tune hums while nets are mended. A rhythm taps quietly during grain grinding. The sounds are simple and familiar, meant to steady rather than excite. In these moments, Celtic culture survives as atmosphere, not artifact. Rituals remain modest and close to the body. A hand touches water before a journey. A shared silence marks the passing of someone old. Children learn these gestures by watching, not being told. The sacred is never distant. It is near enough to be trusted. Across Britain, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, these patterns repeat with variation, like a melody played in different keys. The islands do not feel fragmented, they feel related. Language shifts slightly from shore to shore. Customs adapt to terrain, yet the underlying rhythm holds. This is why island Celtic culture becomes a reservoir for memory. When changes come elsewhere, here there is time to absorb them slowly. Trade arrives softly. Boats appear at familiar coves carrying metal goods, fabrics, ideas. Visitors are received cautiously, not with hostility, but with observation. News is listened to, then set aside until it proves useful. Nothing is adopted quickly, nothing is rejected outright. This patience preserves balance. As days pass into seasons, the listener begins to feel how deeply rooted this life is. It is not static, it grows and adjusts, but without urgency. People move between inland and coast as needed. Families shift locations within known territory. The idea of home stretches without breaking. In this calm history for sleep, island life feels like a long breath held comfortably. And yet, even here, subtle changes begin to ripple. Elders speak of unfamiliar symbols seen on distant sails. Traders mention lands to the south where roads cut straight lines across hills. These details enter conversation without alarm. They are simply noted. The islands continue their rhythm, unaware that attention is slowly turning toward them. As night returns once more, fog gathers again along the cliffs. The sea reflects faint starlight. Fires glow steadily. The people sleep.
confident in patterns that have endured for generations. But beyond the horizon, something watches. Not yet close enough to disturb the water, not yet loud enough to break the calm, only a shape in the distance moving with intention. The story rests here, balanced between continuity and approach, waiting for the moment when the horizon will no longer remain empty.
The islands sleep as they always have, wrapped in mist and steady breath, unaware that the world beyond the sea has begun to focus its gaze. In this final movement of our quiet journey through ancient Britain and Ireland, nothing changes suddenly. That is not how history arrives here. It approaches slowly, almost politely, as if uncertain whether it will be noticed. Along the distant horizon, where sea meets sky, a shape appears and disappears with the light. At first, it is mistaken for cloud, then for imagination. Traders speak of it only in passing, a symbol glimpsed on sails far away, a bird shape carved into metal carried by strangers. The eagle of Rome does not announce itself, it observes. Life on the islands continues unchanged. Fishermen still read the tide before dawn. Farmers still test the soil with bare hands. Songs are still sung in the same tones. Children still fall asleep to stories that end without endings. This is what gives the island Celts their quiet strength. They do not rush to react. They wait. Elders listen carefully when news arrives from the south. They do not interrupt. They ask few questions. What matters is not the power described, but the pattern behind it. Rome is spoken of as a place of straight roads and stone cities, of rules written down and enforced evenly. This sounds distant, almost unreal to a people shaped by curves, by memory, by land that resists uniformity. In this relaxing ancient Celts island life, the idea of an empire feels abstract. Authority here has always been personal, visible, bound by relationship. The notion of distant command does not fit easily into conversation. And yet subtle shifts occur. More traders arrive than before. Foreign objects linger longer in homes. Coins appear beside handcrafted tools. Words from another language are repeated, tested, sometimes forgotten. None of this feels like invasion. It feels like curiosity brushing against habit. Still, some sense the change before it becomes clear. A druid pauses longer when watching the sky. A chieftain listens more closely to stories of distant conflicts, not from fear, but from awareness. The islands have always been shaped by what arrives slowly: weather, tide, time. Rome will be no different, at least not at first. As night falls again, the sea reflects moonlight in broken paths. Fires glow inland, steady and familiar. The people rest, confident in rhythms that have held for generations. The eagle remains far away, a shadow without sound. But history has crossed an invisible line. Attention has turned toward the islands. The calm does not break, it deepens, as if preparing. In this calm history for sleep, the moment before contact matters as much as the moment itself. The Celts of Britain and Ireland are not waiting for conquest. They are living, fully and quietly, at the edge of change. And as this chapter closes, the story does not rush forward. It lingers here, in the last night before the horizon truly fills, honoring a world that has not yet been altered, even as it stands on the threshold of something vast and unfamiliar.
Listen carefully now, not for the sound of horns or clashing shields, but for something quieter, a steady rhythm, measured footsteps moving across distant ground. This is how the Roman conquest enters the story of the ancient Celts, not as a sudden storm, but as a slow adjustment of time itself. In this relaxing history for sleep, Rome does not arrive shouting its name.
It arrives organized, patient, repeating the same motion until the land begins to respond. Across Gaul, roads appear where paths once curved. Camps settle into straight lines. Stone replaces wood, not violently, but persistently. For many Celtic tribes, this change feels confusing rather than terrifying. Life does not end, it rearranges. Some chieftains resist and are remembered briefly. Others negotiate and fade quietly into local memory. Most people continue waking, working, loving, and resting, even as authority shifts above them. In Britannia, the process feels slower still. The island resists urgency. Roman soldiers march north and west, but the land absorbs their presence unevenly. Some tribes are subdued and incorporated. Others retreat into hills, forests, and distant coasts where Roman order thins and softens. This is not a story of disappearance, it is a story of blending. Celtic culture does not vanish under Roman rule, it seeps into it. Local gods are renamed, not erased. Sacred springs become Roman sanctuaries that still feel older than stone. Celtic artisans continue working, adapting patterns to new materials. Latin words mix with older tongues, creating sounds that linger long after the empire itself will fall. In this calm retelling of Roman conquest in Gaul and Britannia, the most important change is not political, but emotional. Time feels different. Where life once followed seasons alone, it now follows schedules as well. Markets appear, coins circulate, travel becomes easier, but also more regulated. Some find comfort in this, others feel something loosen quietly inside them. The Celtic who move farther from Roman centers do not do so in panic, they drift, carrying memory with them. In remote valleys and island edges, older rhythms remain strong. Songs are still sung without notation. Festivals still follow moon and fire rather than calendar. Children still learn stories without knowing they are now considered ancient. Even within Roman towns, Celtic presence remains visible if one looks gently. In names of rivers, in carvings tucked into walls, in local customs Rome never quite understands but allows to continue. This is how survival works in this story, not through resistance alone, but through endurance. Rome conquers territory, but it does not conquer imagination. As the years pass, generations grow up bilingual in habit, if not in language. They walk Roman roads while remembering older paths beneath them. They live in stone houses while still feeling the pull of hill and forest. The ancient Celts do not vanish, they echo. Their way of seeing the world, cyclical, patient, grounded, continues quietly alongside Roman order. And as this part of the story slows, the marching footsteps soften. Roads stretch onward, the empire expands, but something essential has already been set aside, protected not by walls, but by memory. The echo has begun, and it will carry far beyond conquest.
The footsteps have faded now. The roads remain, but the sound that once traveled upon them has softened into memory. In this final moment of our relaxing history for sleep, the Roman world slowly loosens its grip on the story, and something older, quieter, rises gently to the surface. The Celts are no longer named as a people who resist or retreat. They are felt. Their presence lives on in ways that do not require borders or banners. Language carries them first. Words shaped by hills, rain, and rhythm remain woven into everyday speech, especially in places where the land still leads conversation. River names hold their sounds. Place names keep their meanings close to the earth. Even when spoken casually, they echo an older way of seeing the world. Music carries them next. Simple melodies, repeating phrases,
Instruments designed not for grandeur but for closeness still find their way into evenings and gatherings. These sounds do not demand attention, they invite rest. They follow the same patterns once played beside hearths and along coasts, guiding breath and thought toward calm. Festivals carry them further. Seasonal gatherings still follow cycles older than calendars. Fire is lit not to mark victory, but renewal. Harvests are honored not as conquest of land, but as cooperation with it. Even when names change, the feeling remains. The turning of the year still matters. The pause between seasons is still respected. Symbols keep the echo alive as well. Knots without beginning or end appear quietly in art and imagination, reminding us that time does not move only forward. Stories told today still favor transformation over finality. Heroes still return as teachers rather than conquerors. These are not coincidences, they are continuations. In this calm history for sleep, we begin to understand that the Roman conquest did not silence the Celts, it simply layered another rhythm on top of an older one. Empires rise and organize, they build and measure, but beneath them the older pulse continues, patient and circular. The ancient Celts understood this. That is why their legacy did not depend on permanence. It depended on memory carried gently, passed quietly, never forced. As the listener lies still, perhaps with eyes closed now, the world of this story begins to dissolve back into sensation. The sound of wind over a distant hill, the imagined hush of grass moving at night, the faint impression of voices that do not speak loudly but remain. This is the final gift of the Celts to history, the reminder that not everything enduring needs to dominate. Some things last because they adapt, because they soften, because they know when to step back and let others pass. And so, as this story reaches its end, it does not conclude sharply, it rests. The ancient Celts do not disappear into the past, they settle into the background of the present, where they have always belonged. Their echo follows the listener now, not as a call to remember facts, but as a feeling of continuity and calm. The wind moves gently across imagined hills. A final whisper passes through the night, carrying no command, no demand, only presence. And with that, the story lets go, allowing sleep to arrive naturally, held by the quiet, enduring echo of the ancient Celts.